Hi guys, James at Rampant Lion Reviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one we are going to stick to Sweden and we're going to return to a brewery that has now featured on the channel a good number of times before. I've had some really nice beers from these guys over the last couple of years. They're definitely one of the Swedish breweries to keep an eye on at the moment in my opinion, and I would say that they're best known for their kind of New England hazy IPAs and also for their big fruity juicy sours, the Berliner Weisses, the Goses and things like this. So yeah, the one that we're going to try today is a slightly different sub-style from what we've had from them in recent times, and I'm very curious to see how this one turns out compared to the other beers that we've had recently actually. So fingers crossed this is another good beer, hopefully it makes for an interesting review, and I hope that you guys enjoy my take on this one as well. So yeah, for this review then, we are going to head up towards Gothenburg once again, Göteborg as you would say in Swedish, the Swedish craft beer capital up there on the west coast, and we're going to have a look at another beer from Duckpond Brewing. So this one is called Hazy Hustler. It comes in at 6.5% ABV, and this one is another New England hazy IPA. So as far as memory goes, I actually couldn't tell you what the last single New England IPA I had from these guys was. I remember the very first beer that I had that they released under the Duckpond name was a single IPA, but most of the ones I can remember from this brewery have been double imperials or whatever you want to call them. So yeah, this one should be quite interesting. Simply from the perspective, it'll be cool to see what they do with a slightly lower alcohol content. But it seems to be a very highly rated beer. People have told me this one is also pretty nice. So, like I say, hopefully this makes for an interesting review. Incidentally, this beer was released as part of the Lokal Småskalig assortment through Systembolaget here in Sweden for August of 2021. And I do have another beer from these guys to review in a few videos' time. And that's a style that we've not had from them before at all. So that should be quite an interesting review as well. But yeah, looking forward to this one, as I said. So let's crack on with the review. As always with my reviews then, I'll tell you a little bit about the brewery before we taste the beer. If you want to get straight to the tasting, just fast forward. All the usual links are in the video description below. That's the brewery website, the link to my other reviews that I've done from Duckpond Brewing before, and you will no doubt see more added to that list in the near future. But there's all the usual social media down there. If you want to see more reviews, do please consider subscribing to the channel. The whole channel, of course, has a geography-based tagging system, so you can go into the homepage and search for beer based on country, city, state, county, province, prefecture, whatever it is you happen to be interested in. Do check out the playlists of beers from different countries. There is one there for all the Swedish beers that I've reviewed for you. That's constantly being added to, and as always, please do get in touch and let me know some of the other beers and breweries that you guys would like to see me review. It's always great to hear from you guys that are watching the videos, and the support that you show the channel is hugely appreciated. So anyway, on to my brewery notes then to tell you a little bit about Duckpond Brewing. So Duckpond Brewing, as I've told you before, were previously known as Mikrofon or the Microphone Brewery if you translate it into English, and this company is the brainchild of Nikola Sarcevich, who is a singer and songwriter for the band Millencolin, who have been making music since 1993. But the band was originally based in Örebro, out to the west of Stockholm. And he actually moved to Gothenburg while the band was on a break, and in 2013 he began homebrewing with his friend Christian Silva while he was studying international marketing in Skövde. But the two were brewing very small 20-litre batches together, and then Nikola went down to Berlin in Germany for a 2-week brewing course, and then after this they started the company together officially, and it was based for a while in Nikola's house, and at this point they were brewing 200-litre batches. But they changed their name in summer of 2019, and they basically did this because, you know, Mikrofon was a name that didn't really resonate with foreign buyers and things like that, so they thought anglicising the name a little bit would do them a lot of favours, and it seems to have done so. These guys, as I say, have built a very good reputation, and I know that these beers are available in the likes of the UK and further afield now, so it has worked out for them. But they've just been working on increasing their output and their international sales over the last couple of years. But in 2019 they produced around 70,000 litres, and it's also worth noting that these guys are one of the co-owners of the Wizard Brewing brand along with Morgendagens. But originally these guys were producing most of the beers at Popels and Odd Island, but they now have their own premises in Kungston, and they've just hired Magnus Lorraine as their new brewer. And as of August 2021, when I'm filming this review for you, there have been 40 beers produced under the Duckpond name, and there was somewhere between 15 to 20 before that had been released under the Mikrofon Bryggeriet name. So that is quite an impressive array of beers, I guess we could say. About 60 beers released by this brewery in total, and they're always putting out a couple of new things. every month, in fact. But yeah, that's all I can really tell you about Duckpond Brewing for the moment. As I said, this brewery are worth checking out if you're a fan of the New England Hazy IPAs or the big fruity juicy sours, the Berliner Weisses and the Goses and things like this. But they have, I'm sure I've had an Imperial Stout from these guys, and then we do have, as I say, another beer style that I've not had from these guys before to try it later in the month, so I'm certainly looking forward to that review. But yeah, that's it for your history section of this video. If you want to learn more, you can check out the brewery website. As I say, you can follow them on Facebook and Instagram to keep up to date with all the latest goings on, and you can check out the Rate Beer, Untappd and Beer Advocate pages to learn a little bit more about all the different beers that these guys have done. So yeah, that's it for the moment. Let's crack on and have a look at this beer itself then. So I'll just let you have a little look at the artwork on this one before we open it up. As you can see, the camera probably doesn't like the artwork on this one because it is a little bit like a barcode. Just as well we're not using CRTs these days, because you know this is the sort of one that would make a CRT television just go aff its nut. But yeah, as you can see, Hazy Hustler, 6.5%. You can see on the back here, there is the Duckpond Brewing Company symbol. And this one, it is worth pointing out, contains wheat, oats and regular barley malt, but it's hopped with Simcoe and Mosaic. So an age-old combination, this one. This beer cost me the standard 45 Swedish kronor, so that is €4.50, £4 sterling, somewhere in the region of $5 American for those of you watching in different parts of the world. Standard price for a Swedish brewed IPA through Systembolaget. But yeah, let's get this guy out and we'll get on with the tasting then. Curious to see. Doesn't want to open. Yeah, there we go. I was just worried it was going to explode there. But yeah, as I say, let's get this guy out and into the glass. Ooh. This does look quite nice actually. Looks a little bit darker than some of the other ones we've had, in fairness, as well. So yeah, that is about 3/4 of it out the can and into the glass. Let me just line this up again so that my OCD is happy. And there we are. So, I'll tell you something, the aroma out of this is pretty nice as well as you open it up. So if we shine the light through this beer, it's got a lovely, very kind of rich yellow colour to it, I have to say. But before the head disappears, you can see that the head on this one, it is just slightly less than a finger, and I would say that it's a kind of cream coloured head. It's definitely not perfect white. This one is a sort of creamy, almost slightly ivory colour, in fact. But yeah, as you can see, the colour of the beer itself is a nice kind of, it is a nice sort of rich, darker yellow beer. So I always like comparing the New England IPAs to different fruit juices because that's just what the appearance reminds me of. So this one reminds me a little bit more of a kind of mixed tropical fruit juice. But remember, the colour of your beer depends on, one, the type of malts that you use. That determines the magnitude of the colour of the beer, the EBC rating essentially. But then the length of your wort boil is also going to play a role, because the longer you boil the wort, the more the sugars caramelise, and thus you'll get a slightly darker colour of beer. But it doesn't affect the EBC rating too much, I would say, unless you go for very long boils. But then also any adjuncts that you put into the beer and barrel aging that you do will affect it as well. But usually when it comes to IPAs, those are two variables that we don't have to care so much about. It's mainly kind of sour beers that we have to think about those things. So yeah, nothing out of the ordinary in terms of the way that this beer appears, but definitely one of the richer yellow colours, and that to me indicates that there's potentially going to be a few slightly brown sugary orientated malts in this one. But yeah, the level of haze on this one for a 6.5% is actually pretty impressive. It's not the soupiest and gloopiest of IPAs that you're going to come across, but in fairness, I would say that this one, in terms of haze, is actually quite similar to what we've had from the double IPAs from these guys. So this kind of shows you what I've said in other videos as well. There's not really a rule as to how much haze you're going to get in these beers, but it is affected by the yeast, the oat content and the wheat content. It varies from brewery to brewery, recipe to recipe and so on. There's no real rule for this, like I've said. But yeah, one or two big bubbles sticking towards the side of the glass, a few little ones going up towards the bottom of the head there, and the head incidentally has just faded away to be a very nice kind of thin foamy layer, but there's a big ring sort of sticking around the edge of the glass on this one, so it certainly looks the part of a New England IPA, as they say. But let's take a closer look at the aroma of this one then and just see how we get on. Very curious to see what this beer has in store for us. Yeah, that does smell pretty nice actually. So, you know, oddly enough, the aroma of this one actually reminds me a little bit of some of the Apex beers that I've had. That's kind of interesting, that. And it's maybe just because it's the lower alcohol content. Oddly enough, when it comes to Apex, most of the IPAs that I've had from them in recent times have been single IPAs. But this really does remind me a little bit more of some of the Apex ones we've had. And that, honestly, if I was given this beer blind, I actually think I would probably guess that it was an Apex beer. So that's interesting. So the first thing that you notice about this beer, and the reason that I say that, this one has it's got a very soft kind of white bready note to it. You get a little tiny touch of a very slight woody farmhousey kind of thing out of it. And that must be to do with whatever yeast they're using. And it may be one of the malt types or something like that. But yeah, you certainly get a wee touch of the farmhousey character out of this. As I've said in previous reviews as well, for me there's 6 different directions you can go with a New England IPA. They can be farmhousey and yeasty, they can be sort of more rye leaning and grainy, wheaty and bitey, oaty and creamy, what have we not said, barley malt leaning and bready, or they can be a little bit more kind of brown sugary and sweet if you like. This one, and quite often they will display multiple characteristics. This one, compared to the other duck ponds, has just a wee touch of that lighter, more barley malt leaning bready kind of thing, but also a wee touch of a slightly woody farmhousey character to it. So I really like how that goes together in this beer as well. The aroma of this one is certainly really, really interesting. So yeah, I can certainly appreciate how this beer goes about its business from that perspective. So yeah, interesting stuff, should we say. Yeah, but the malty backbone of this one, as I say, you've got a soft kind of white bready character to it. There's a little bit of a woody undertone in there and some of the nice kind of yeasty elements as well. You've got a smooth kind of wheaty element to this beer, a sort of smooth wheaty white, the wheat kind of sits on top of the white bread and just thickens it up a wee bit. You do get a bit of wheaty bitiness at the back of the nose, but you can also smell some of the oaty. You can smell some of the oaty creaminess coming out of this beer as well, which is quite interesting. But yeah. Yeah, the malt base on this one I do quite like. I think what we said sums it up quite nicely. Like a soft kind of barley malt backbone to it, the soft kind of white bready note in there. It's got a wee bit of a kind of floury element to it, as we say. There's a bit of that, like when you get a fresh bread and there's just a wee bit of flour on the bread crust, you do get that in there. You can feel a sort of wheaty layer sitting on top of it, thickening it out a wee bit of a wheaty bite element in there, but you do get 1 or 2 little woody farmhousey elements, and you can also smell a smoother kind of oaty character on top of this one. But yeah, you do get a little element of kind of brown sugar in this one too, a wee bit of that kind of Werther's Original butter candy, butterscotchy type thing. You do get a little bit of that in this beer as well, and that's kind of par for the course these days with these New England IPAs. And when you consider the colour of this one, that's not surprising, because this kind of darker, richer yellow, that tells you, there's going to be a bit of Cara Munich or Cara Pils or something like that in this beer actually. So yeah, the malty base in this one is quite nicely done. I'm curious to see how this translates or transpires in the flavour actually. But yeah, I think that's everything we need to say about the malty yeasty part of the aroma. But on the fruity side of things and the hoppy side of things, it's kind of what you'd expect. Simcoe and Mosaic is a combination that we are very familiar with. Simcoe, of course, usually big kind of soft juicy passion fruits in a New England IPA, 12% alpha acid. Mosaic 13 to 14% alpha acid. It gives you a kind of oily tangerine. But yeah, you can smell these two straight away with this, and they work really nicely. So in the green component, I do get a little bit of earthiness in the back of the nose with this one. There's a lovely bright floral aromaticity to it. I wouldn't say it's spice or anything like that, but it's got a lovely, just very bright floral aromaticity. And there's also a nice kind of grassy, zestiness on the front tip of the nose as well actually. So I really like how that goes together in this beer. The green component gives you a nice little bit of freshness to this one really, but the fruity side of the beer is pretty much what you'd expect. There's definitely a nice kind of smooth passion fruity note to this one. You get a wee bit of the pungent passion fruit a little bit behind, but then you get a nice kind of bright juicy passion fruit in front of that. You will of course get a few undertones of apricots and things like this, but then you get that oily tangerine note out of this one, and I think the tangerine is slightly more prominent than the kind of tropo side of it, but at the same time it does maintain a fairly decent balance actually. So this beer is quite nice. I don't find it quite as complex as some of the other ones we've had in terms of the fruity characters. But you know, it does. I think the kind of the malt base almost comes across as a wee bit more complex in a sense, which is unusual, considering that this is a single IPA rather than a double IPA. But yeah, could just be that I'm noticing the difference between this and other ones we've had previously from Duckpond. But yeah, take a bit of time to ponder over the aroma of this one before you get stuck into it, because it is, you know, quite nice. This, it really has a lovely aroma. I think it goes together really well. But let's just put the rest of it in the glass, and then we can have a taste of this one then. So that's it lined up. Let's actually have a taste of this beer. So yeah, this one is the Hazy Hustler, 6.5% New England Hazy, whatever you want to call it, IPA from Duckpond Brewing in Gothenburg, Göteborg, up on the Swedish west coast. Really curious about this. Slanja, skål, cheers. Yeah. That's pretty damn solid, actually. It is. It's actually... It's the first impression I have of this one is that it's quite, as I say, the breadiness is quite big in this one. And it does have that sort of soft, almost kind of floury, bread crusty backbone to it, which is kind of interesting. So, yeah. Yeah, the way that this goes together is very nice. This is another solid beer, actually. It's taking my brain a little bit of time just to get its head around this a little bit, because it does almost have the same level of creaminess that we've had from the doubles, actually. The mouthfeel of this one is really similar to the doubles, but it's almost just like, you know, you've taken away a little bit of the thickness of the you know, the thickness of the wheat and the thickness of the oats, and it does seem a little bit more kind of barley malt focused, this one. To me, that would be the main difference between this and some of the double IPAs that we've had from Duckpond, and it kind of carries on. The last one we had was the muffin top, if I remember right, and that felt a little bit more kind of savoury in a sense. It had a little bit of a kind of savoury element to it, and this beer carries on in the same vein as that, and that makes sense, you know, a bit of continuity in their brewing, of course. But yeah, this one, it's a nice step forward, if you like, a nice transition, I guess we could say, from the muffin top. But yeah, it really, in terms of the New England IPAs generally, I would say that this one is a soft, white bready leaning one. That's fair to say, and it does have a bit of that kind of slightly savoury element that we had in the muffin top. So let's just try and break this down a wee bit more in depth for you and describe what's going on. So yeah, on the fruity, on the malty side of things, we start with the malt base. Wake up, brain. So middle third of your palate and back third of your palate. And the backbone of this beer is undoubtedly, you know, a kind of slightly crisp white bready note there. You can feel a few bread crusty elements mixing into that, but that's the backbone there. And as I say, you get a little bit of that kind of floury bread crusty sort of thing in there as well. Absolutely. On top of this, you can feel a layer of wheat. You can feel the wheat in there just sort of thickening that white bready layer out, if you like. So you've definitely got that. But if we focus on the middle third of your palate, then at either end of that middle third of your palate, you get a slightly stronger bread crusty element. And then as you go down the middle, as you go down the kind of middle line of your tongue there, you can feel a thicker, oaty, creamy element to this one there. You can feel the real thickness of the oats. You can feel the real thickness of the oats there down the middle line of your tongue. But in fairness, as you move out towards the edges of the palate, you can feel that some of the oats just creep over the edge, just creep out to the edge of that, actually. So that is quite interesting from that perspective. But yeah, as I say, nice, smooth, big, thick oaty creamy note down the middle of your palate there, and it does thicken up. In fairness, this beer does thicken up the further you go into the aftertaste with it. But as I say, the difference between this one and the double IPAs that we've had is just the wheatiness doesn't feel quite as thick, and the oatiness isn't quite as thick. I think that's fair to say, but it still maintains a really creamy mouthfeel. Actually, it's potentially more creamy than some of the other ones we've had actually. But yeah, it's interesting for sure. But on top of that oaty layer, you do get a wee bit, there's a sort of smaller circle in the very centre of your palate there, and you can feel a little bit of that kind of Werther's Original butter candy, butterscotchy type thing. In the dead centre of your palate, you've got a slightly sweet caramel there, but then, yeah, a more butter candy-ish type thing underneath it. You do get one or two little biscuity elements as you move further out towards the edge of your palate there, but the breadiness really starts to lean. I really get a little bit more of a kind of bread crusty type note out of the white bready elements in this beer sitting underneath. Definitely get a wee bit of that. I would say that you do get one or two woody undertones in that middle third of your palate as well, so there's a wee kind of farmhousey element to this one, and some of the yeasty flavour is coming out as well, but that's mainly in the back third of your palate. Other than that though, I don't think there's too much to say about the middle third of your tongue. So let's move on to the back third then. Border region between middle third and back third, again you get a wee bit of a bready build up in there, a wee bit more of that kind of bread crusty grainy note. As we said earlier, the backbone of the beer is that soft white bready note. There's a bit of bread crusty character to it and a wee bit of that floury sort of thing. You can feel the wheat just thickening up that bready layer on top of it, and as you get towards the back of the palate you can feel the wheaty bitiness, and then some of the oats do creep in a little bit but not too much. But on top of that you get that nice kind of you certainly get that bigger, more airy, yeasty note out of this one, and that's where you get a little bit of the farmhousey note. It is like a sort of airy, woody, crackery sort of bread, and that's probably, in fairness, that's probably a good descriptor as well for the base of this beer. It does have a wee bit of that kind of crackery, knäckebröd type thing going on. Knäckebröd, of course, isn't a good descriptor for those of you outside of the Nordic countries, but there's this sort of granola cracker type thing that you get here in Sweden that is that is, as we say, knäckebröd. So bear that in mind. It really does have a wee bit of that knäckebröd sort of backbone to it. But yeah, as you start from the back of your palate with this one, you can feel the flavour is a bit taller. And as you move further forward on this one, you can feel the flavour just condenses down a little bit. And as you go into the middle third of your palate, you can feel it's a wee bit more kind of squashed together in a sense. So yeah. But yeah, the sort of smoother side of the beer, it really does come across as quite smooth, this one, but I think it feels a bit more creamy. I think this one could potentially even be creamier than the double IPAs. I've said that a few times in the video now, but that's really how this one strikes me. It's definitely a wee bit more kind of creamy, but almost a little bit slicker and wetter, if you like, but that's to be expected from the difference between a double IPA and a single IPA. But let's focus on the hoppy side of the beer. I don't think we need to say anything more about the malty part of it. So hoppy side of things, back corners of the palate, you definitely get a wee bit of earthiness out of this one. That's mosaic all the way. But as you move further forward from that, the earthiness actually does spread forward a wee bit, but then as you reach the kind of front corners of the palate, you've got a nice big floral aromatic sort of thing coming out of this one. So a nice sort of spicy floral aromaticity to the beer. Around the front curve of the palate though, it's a little bit lighter and grassy, and as I say, you do get a wee bit of zestiness out of this one, that's for sure. So yeah, the grassy, the sort of grassy notes you get on that front curve of the palate, I think, are very, very nice. It lingers into the aftertaste, actually, that zestiness that you get out of this, and I do think that is something that I like about this one, that big zestiness that you get. That's, I think, most likely to be the mosaic, to be honest with you. And I do think, generally speaking, with this beer, mosaic is showing its more zesty side, which is definitely interesting too. So yeah, let's focus on that front third of your palate, and the green component of this one is quite nice. Bright floral aromaticity and a good wee bit of grassy zestiness, and I do like that. I do like that about the beer. I think that's one of the advantages of the lighter IPAs, if you like, is that you can get a slightly bigger green component, if that makes sense, and it's not, it's not kind of countered too much by a big malty thing there. So I think lighter IPAs like this do allow the green component of the beer to shine a little bit more. So that's worth bearing in mind. But yeah, front third of your palate then. Border region between front third and middle third of your palate. Again, you get a little bit of a bready build up in there and a wee bit of a bread crusty thing. But the base of that front third of your palate, soft, kind of smooth, white bready element to it. Bigger. You can feel a bit of the kind of smoother wheaty note there, but then on top of that you get that nice oily bubble where those juicy fruity esters roll the way out of the beer. And like we said earlier, Simcoe and Mosaic, it's a tried and tested combination. So when you go to the back of that front third of your palate then, there's certainly a bit of that kind of more pungent passion fruity element there, but it mellows out as you move further forward. Of course you've got little undertones of, apricot and pineapple and stuff like this, but those are quite minimal. For me, the more pungent passion fruit actually, it does start to creep forward the further you go into the aftertaste. So yeah, I say a wee bit of passion fruit at the back there, but as you go further forward, as we say, it's a little bit more, it does mellow out a little bit, and then as you reach the kind of middle, the dead centre of that front third of your palate, you do get, as I say, a wee bit of apricot underneath and a bit of pineapple on top, but then you really move into a more oily, kind of citrusy front half of the front third of your palate. So the Mosaic comes across as really quite big and zesty in this one. If I was, tasting this blind, I actually would have guessed it was Amarillo, because usually I've always found that Mosaic is a wee bit more oily and mellow, whereas Amarillo is a bit, it just is a bit more zesty. And I've noticed that in recent times when I've had single hop Amarillo beers. But of course your palate is always changing, so everything to a degree with these tastings is kind of relative. But yeah, you get the Mosaic in this one for me is showing quite a zesty side that I haven't seen too much of, if you like. I've always thought Mosaic is a bit more soft and oily in a sense. So interesting things to take away. A few interesting things to take away from this. From this review in a sense. So both hops actually showing a little bit of their more kind of pungent, powerful side, which I think is interesting. So yeah, I like how I do like how that goes together. But I would say the fruity side of the beer mellows out a wee bit further you go into the aftertaste. You can get a little bit of that softer tangerine note sitting underneath it. So yeah, it gets a thumbs up from me in that regard. This is a nice IPA, and of course I'm comparing it to the double IPAs that I've had from Duckpond before, but they've done a solid job of this. There's no doubt in my mind about that. Just is a little bit different, and it's always nice to try different things from breweries that you know quite well. So yeah, let's just round off this review with the mouthfeel then. I would say this beer, certainly pushing towards the top end of mid-bodied. The mouthfeel this one isn't too different from the double IPAs we've had before. As I say, it feels a little bit wetter, potentially more creamy, but just the malty base doesn't seem quite as thick, and that would make sense, I think everything else is probably quite similar to it, to be honest. In terms of the IBU count, I think this is a standard 30 IBU beer. Could be 40 at push, but I think it's probably a 30 IBU beer, to be honest with you. The green component of this one does have a nice bit of brightness, and it shines out. It shines a little bit more because the malt base isn't quite as big in this beer. But yeah, fruity side of it is a little bit more pungent. And as I say, you've got the passion fruit from the Simcoe is quite pungent. The zestiness from the Mosaic is quite pungent in this, and I think it just works. I really think that this beer is a very nice concoction, should we say. So yeah, I think we can round off this review there. A solid beer once again from Duckpond Brewing, and that's what we've grown accustomed to from these guys. So yeah, check this one out and see what you think. A bit different from what we're used to from them, but it still gives you the same quality that you would expect, I think we could say. So yeah, I've enjoyed this one. So this was the Hazy Hustler, 6.5% New England IPA with Mosaic and Simcoe from Duckpond Brewing in Gothenburg up on the west coast of Sweden. Thank you again for watching my reviews. Until the next time, please like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff. Let me know your own thoughts on this beer in the comment section below. Let me know what your favourite beers are from Duckpond Brewing. We will return to these guys in a couple of videos time, because we do have the other beer to look at from this month. But thank you again for watching. Check out my social media, check out theirs, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Always cool to return to Duckpond Brewing, and there's many more reviews to come from the locals this month. Slange, skål, cheers, and see you guys in the next review.